Hey guys, tonight we're diving headfirst, well, gently reclining, into the sleep-starved, lavender-scented world of Victorian insomnia. Picture it, gas lamps hissing all night, train whistles screaming past narrow brick terraces, and upstairs, you're tossing and turning under 3 itchy wool blankets. Your brain's buzzing with telegrams and factory bells. Sound familiar? You, my friend, are just another victim of the 19th century sleep crisis. You probably won't survive this without yawning. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start the evening surrounded by a thick, coal-smudged twilight. The year is 1857. The streets of Manchester never seem to sleep now. A hum of industry pulses through the city like a second heartbeat, faster than yours. Somewhere nearby, a printing press is clattering out fresh gossip, and down the alley, a man hawks fish by gaslight. You're exhausted, but wired. Why? The answer may begin with a simple switch. Not a light switch, those come later, but a turning point, artificial lighting. Gaslights flood homes, factories, and public streets, extending productivity well past sundown. You used to have darkness as a natural curfew. Now, you're reading Dickens at midnight and stitching trousers for 7 extra hours. Your circadian rhythm is politely requesting a refund. Historians still argue whether this change in lighting alone was enough to upend the natural sleep cycle, but there's consensus that industrialization made insomnia a class-crossing epidemic. For the first time, sleeplessness wasn't just the occasional byproduct of illness. It was a lifestyle hazard. By 1850, the phrase industrial insomnia started cropping up in medical journals. Doctors, mostly upper-class men with fine mustaches and strong opinions about digestion, speculated that humanity had evolved too quickly. One London physician wrote that the mind has outpaced the body in its enthusiasm, which is Victorian for everyone's brains are fried. But it wasn't just the light. It was the rhythm of the new world. Factory shifts rotated unpredictably. Train travel sliced time into tinier chunks. And caffeine, oh yes, coffee houses boomed alongside the textile mills. Even children were now sipping tea with their supper, because what's childhood without a little pre-bedtime stimulation? You trudge home from a 12-hour shift, smelling of engine oil and soot. The streets are alive, even as the moon rises. Neighbors argue about taxes through paper-thin walls. Your roommate is testing out his new pocket watch alarm with great enthusiasm. You lie in bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, and begin counting things. Cracks, breaths, regrets. No sleep. One quirky fix-it shop on Fleet Street advertised a sleep bell. A handheld chime meant to hypnotize you into slumber by ringing it softly next to your ear until boredom or madness kicked in. It was popular for about a week. Historians still debate whether it ever worked, or if it just drove housemates to hide the bell out of self-preservation. The irony is, Victorians were obsessed with order. Charts for diet, schedules for exercise, rules for everything from beard trimming to toenail clipping. But sleep. Sleep remained maddeningly elusive, almost rebellious. You couldn't will yourself to sleep. You couldn't moralize it into existence. It mocked you from just beyond the gaslight's reach. Some blamed the air. The new cities were pungent, full of smoke, horses, coal dust. A leading theory suggested insomnia was simply your lungs staging a protest. Solutions included sleeping in oxygen tents, which were essentially beds surrounded by gauzy curtains doused in eucalyptus. Refreshing. Unless your candle caught the curtain, in which case, well, one less insomniac. Others blamed moral decay. Too much reading, especially novels, particularly romantic novels. Ladies were warned that reading after dinner could stir the imagination so fiercely they'd be awake until dawn, dreaming of inappropriate Frenchmen. One pamphlet warned that Balzac caused restless leg and impure thought. So where does this leave you? You, standing here in your flannel nightgown, clutching a half-filled hot water bottle and wondering whether to try vinegar on your pillow again. The pamphlet said it worked for Napoleon, though it also said he slept 3 hours a night and talked to chairs. There was comfort in ritual. Victorians didn't just go to bed. They prepared for it. You might sip a warm barley drink, rub linseed oil into your temples, say your prayers, then wind your pocket watch precisely 22.5 times. Maybe that last part was just superstition, or a way to avoid your own thoughts. Still, your body resists. You're still buzzing from the flickering light of the reading lamp. The ticking of the new mantel clock sounds like a judge's gavel. Every small sound becomes a reason to stay awake. You can almost hear time dragging its feet. In this new world, everyone seems a little more tired than they let on. Even the poets complain. Tennyson wrote about a spirit watching at the gate of sleep. Poor guy was probably just trying to nod off next to an overcooked coal fire. And so, you lie there. You're not sick. You're not in danger. You're just awake. And that, somehow, is the most frustrating thing of all. Because there is no one to blame. Not even yourself. Just a world that forgot to dim the lights and let itself rest. You're not the only one lying awake, staring into the flickering gaslight. All across London, Edinburgh, Liverpool, tiny silhouettes shift behind lace-curtained windows. A restless nation turns in unison. And now, where there's demand, there's profit. Enter the insomnia doctors. Of course, they never called themselves that. Too modern, too plain. These were men of letters, physicians, natural philosophers, sometimes even hypnotists, who specialized in what they delicately termed nervous afflictions of the evening. Fancy phrasing, but really, they were the first sleep specialists, and they made a killing off your midnight misery. You shuffle into one of their consulting rooms, dim, carpeted, vaguely damp. It smells of boiled herbs and disappointment. The doctor has large whiskers, smaller spectacles, and a fondness for quoting Galen. He nods gravely as you describe your sleeplessness. The liver, he says, is agitated. You're handed a complex bedtime regimen involving fennel, barley water, a brisk walk before dusk, and, most importantly, a promise to stop reading anything French. Historians still argue whether these Victorian sleep doctors actually helped their patients or merely soothed them with placebo rituals and upper-class decorum. What's certain is that they charged handsomely. A visit might set you back the equivalent of a week's wages, not counting the cost of follow-ups, herbal compounds, or the custom wool sleep bonnet he insists you need. The curious thing, some of the advice was surprisingly sound, if only by accident. Warm milk, less caffeine, dim lighting, limited mental stimulation before bed. Nothing revolutionary by today's standards, but in an age of electric corsets and mercury-laced toothpaste, it was refreshingly tame. Other recommendations, however, ventured straight into the surreal. One popular treatment involved staring at a flickering oil lamp while slowly inhaling cinnamon steam. The logic. The light would entrance the mind, and the spice would distract the bile. In practice, it mostly led to sweaty naps and sneezing fits. And then there were the home consultations, house calls to the truly afflicted. Picture it, you, bundled in your cold upstairs bedroom, waiting as the doctor trudges through the fog with a leather satchel full of glass bottles, a tuning fork, and a collapsible chair. He sits by your bed like a priest, listening intently to your description of your torment. The ceiling that seems to breathe, the ticking that grows louder at night, the sensation that sleep hovers just beyond your reach like a balloon on a breeze. He nods. Your temperament is choleric. The liver's whispering again. Out comes a remedy, a soft ball of beeswax and lavender, to be tucked behind your ear. It calms the fluids, he explains. You want to argue, but you're too tired for logic. So you press the wax behind your ear and wait. Quirky as it sounds, there was something genuinely soothing about these rituals. They weren't medically rigorous, sure, but they gave structure to the unstructured chaos of night. You weren't alone with your restlessness. You were engaged in a battle against it. You had props, instructions. Someone was listening. Still, not all doctors were quite so gentle. Some leaned toward the theatrical. Dr. Herbert Fenwick, yes, an actual name, believed insomnia stemmed from mental congestion and would hover over patients with a copper funnel, claiming it drew nervous excess out of the skull. One unfortunate woman later described the experience as both alarming and extremely drafty. A rival doctor, not to be outdone, introduced the night chair. Essentially a rocking chair with adjustable armrests, it was meant to induce hypnotic calm through motion. It worked decently, until it caught fire next to a gas lamp during an overnight trial in Leeds. No one was injured, but the experiment was shelved. Interestingly, Victorians were far more likely to medicalize sleeplessness in women. A woman who complained of insomnia might be diagnosed with hysteria or melancholia. A man, usually just overworked. Same problem, different vocabulary, and, quite often, different treatments. One account from 1873 details a woman named Marianne, aged 32, whose sleep issues were treated with daily dabs of rosewater, forced bed rest, and the removal of all fiction books from her room. Her recovery, the doctor wrote proudly, was greatly assisted by the introduction of a parlor cat. To be fair, cats are pretty soothing. Meanwhile, working-class patients had fewer options. You couldn't afford a private doctor, let alone a parlor cat. So you relied on second-hand advice, passed down through neighbors, pamphlets, and the occasional shouting match at the town square. Mix mustard in warm water. Sleep with your feet uphill. Drink vinegar and chant psalms. Who's to say what worked and what was just folklore wearing a cravat? In 1858, a particularly ambitious sleep doctor claimed he could cure insomnia permanently by placing a lump of polished jade on the chest. Sales of jade trinkets skyrocketed. Skeptics laughed. But for a brief, twinkling moment, the sleepless masses believed. After all, sometimes the hope of sleep is almost as good as sleep itself. And that, perhaps, is what these doctors really sold. Not rest, but the promise of rest. The idea that you weren't broken. That someone, somewhere, had an answer to the long nights. That you weren't the only one staring into the dark. So you tuck yourself in, your beeswax tucked behind your ear, your jade amulet nestled under your collarbone. Outside, a carriage clatters by, the hoofbeats rhythmic and oddly comforting. Maybe you'll sleep tonight. Or maybe, like so many others, you'll just lie still, eyes closed, letting the doctor's voice echo in your head like a bedtime story you've half forgotten but still find strangely comforting. The Victorians weren't content with doctors alone. Oh no, you're about to meet the real stars of the sleep craze, the gadget men, the contraption crafters, The slightly too enthusiastic inventors who stared at the ceiling one sleepless night and thought, "What if I strapped something to my head?" And then they did. You're browsing a small apothecary in Bristol. The shelves groan under jars of leeches, peppermint lozenges, and various tinctures labeled tonic with no further explanation. In the corner, a stack of curious boxes. The packaging reads, Dr. Penworthy Somnolid, mechanical encouragement for the sleep inclined. You pry one open. Inside, a padded headband with a dangling brass weight that gently tugs your eyelids closed. A sleep machine. You laugh, until you remember you haven't slept in 3 days. Victorians loved gadgets, especially when they addressed vague, frustrating ailments. Insomnia became a goldmine for sleepy entrepreneurs. By 1870, Britain was awash in inventions promising rest. Vibrating pillows, air pressure blankets, and even water-cooled mattresses, which mostly resulted in very soggy dreams. Historians still argue whether these devices were sincere efforts or clever scams. Probably both. Some were designed by engineers with genuine scientific intent. Others came from independent researchers whose primary qualification was having a cousin at the patent office. Take the Somno clock. It looked like a regular mantel clock, but emitted a soft ticking infused with lavender oil. The inventor claimed the rhythm was mathematically optimized to gently coerce the human spirit into dormancy. Unfortunately, early models had a tendency to chime randomly at 2 a.m., causing more than one insomniac to pitch it out the window. Then there was the slumber cradle, not for babies, but adults. Imagine a softly swaying bed suspended from the ceiling, meant to mimic the lulling motion of a carriage. It worked, sort of, until one unfortunate gentleman in Portsmouth snapped a ceiling beam and was found by his butler dangling like a serene marionette. You, naturally, are skeptical, but also desperate. So you try something a little less dramatic, the nightcap of lead. It's exactly what it sounds like, a thick-lined cloth cap with tiny lead weights sewn into the hem to encourage drowsy submission of the cranium. You put it on. It's heavy, oddly comforting, also mildly concerning. You wonder if lead poisoning is more restful than insomnia. Still, there's something soothing in the ritual. Strapping on your sleep contraption, winding up your ticking oil diffuser, sliding into bed like a human science experiment. The predictability helps. Sleep, after all, love's habit. One fringe inventor claimed his device worked by harnessing lunar magnetism. It was a copper disc you placed under your pillow on nights when the moon was waxing. Supposedly, it aligned your humors with the sleeping tides. Mostly, it just turned your pillow green. But the name was excellent, the Dream Disc of Lunaris. And of course, there were the sleep teas. Shelves of them. Chamomile, valerian, lemon balm. Some worked gently, others less so. One notorious blend, called Mr. Wiggins' Night Tincture, included not only opium but a pinch of belladonna. It guaranteed restful blankness. And sometimes, hallucinations of choir boys riding flaming hedgehogs. Your mileage may vary. Not all gadgets were ridiculous. The sleep curtain, for instance, was simply a blackout fabric you draped over your canopy bed, surprisingly effective in the days before light-blocking blinds. Another clever design, the silent ticker, a watch set inside a wool pouch to muffle its sound but keep the rhythm close to the ear. One reviewer described it as a heartbeat not your own. And then there were beds. Oh, the beds. Feather mattresses were standard for the wealthy, but not always comfortable. Some inventors went wild. Heated headboards, gravity-adjustable pillows, and ventilated sleep slabs carved from cork. You lie on one, stare at the ceiling, and wonder whether sleep is a state of mind or a side effect of giving up. There's a sweet absurdity in it all. These people tried everything. They took their insomnia and treated it like a foe to be conquered, not endured. Their inventions were personal, fussy, sometimes wildly ineffective, but they reflected a truth you still feel now, that the absence of sleep is maddening, and the pursuit of it becomes its own peculiar art. One museum in modern-day Bath holds a small collection of these devices. A weighted sleep doll, a velvet pouch full of dream stones, a copy of the Illustrated Compendium of Nocturnal Relief Instruments, 1879 edition. It's hard not to laugh, but also hard not to relate, because you, too, have tried odd things. A podcast about ancient plumbing. Ocean sounds on loop. That one sleep app with the Scottish man who talks about bread for 45 minutes. We haven't really changed, have we? Even now, in your cozy fan-humming bedroom, you feel a small kinship with that man from 1862 who built a mechanical rocking bed with foot pedals. You respect the hustle. You understand the need. So, you roll over. Tug your blanket a little higher. Maybe you'll dream of tinkering Victorians, of sleep helmets and whisper clocks, and the faint, ridiculous hope that somewhere, buried under a pile of lavender-scented patents, there really was a cure. Now that you've met the doctors and the gadgeteers, it's time to tiptoe into the cozier corners of Victorian sleep culture. The domestic rituals, the bedtime atmospheres, the soft, repetitive habits that promised a gentler descent into slumber. Think less electric corset, more tea tray and ticking clock. You're in a modest middle-class home. Not grand, but comfortable. There's a fire popping softly in the grate. Heavy curtains muffle the street noise. You're wrapped in a shawl, plaid of course, and sitting by the hearth with a half-empty cup of chamomile in your hands. This is where the real sleep prep happens. The winding down, the unspoken choreography of Victorian bedtime. Every household had its routine, and every routine had its stars. Warming pans, hot water bottles, lavender sachets, beeswax candles. That faint, waxy, smoky scent lingers in the drapery, faint but ever present. You move through the motions not because they're exciting, but because they are the same every night. And that sameness, that predictability, is deeply, deeply calming. You heat a brick by the fire, wrap it in flannel, slip it beneath the sheets at your feet. The heat radiates slowly, like a sleepy heartbeat. You're not asleep yet, but you're getting there, even if you don't know it. Mainstream history tells you about wars and inventions, but not about the culture of the bedroom. And this is where Victorians shone. They invented dozens of customs just to lull themselves into that first heavy blink. You brush your hair, 20 strokes per side. You blow out one lamp at a time, slowly. You recite, perhaps not a prayer, but a memorized line or two from Byron or Shelley. You turn your mattress once a week, clockwise, always clockwise. Superstition? Probably. But it adds a rhythm, and rhythm is the lullaby of grown-ups. Historians still argue whether these domestic sleep rituals were consciously therapeutic or simply byproducts of strict Victorian domestic discipline. After all, there were rules for everything in this era, from salad forks to sighing. But perhaps those rules, however odd, gave structure to something as unruly as the human mind at rest. One fringe account from a Welsh boarding house claimed all lodgers were instructed to place a silver spoon under their pillow each night to reflect away unsettling thoughts. It didn't work, but it did cut down on petty theft. And there was something comforting about knowing you'd done your part to shield your dreams. Let's talk scents. Oh, the smells of sleep. Lavender, chamomile, bergamot, even thyme, which was believed to tame the pulse. Housewives would steep herbs on the stove, dabbing the brew on handkerchiefs or pouring it into ceramic dream pots placed near the bed. The air was heavy with perfume and steam, sometimes pleasant, sometimes overpowering. One woman in Essex reportedly fainted from a combination of clove oil and poor ventilation. Sleep, after all, is not without risk. Then there was the bedtime snack. Not too much. Gluttony was frowned upon. But a slice of bread and milk, perhaps with a drop of brandy for nerve calming. Some preferred rice pudding or a soft-boiled egg. Nothing too spicy. Definitely no onions. You might offend the spirits of the night. If you were fortunate enough to have a servant, there'd be a faint tap at the door and a whispered, "Your tray, madam." If not, you'd prepare your own with trembling hands. The ritual was the same. And the sameness, again, did its quiet work. Children were given lullabies. Adults, too, though we didn't call them that. Evening novels were read aloud, gently, rhythmically. Dickens was popular, as were the ghost stories of M.R. James, though they walked a fine line between soothing and absolutely bone-chilling. One gentlewoman in Devon wrote of drifting off each night to the sound of her sister's voice reading aloud from a scientific pamphlet about fungi. It was dreadfully dull, she recalled, and therefore effective. Let's not forget the noises of the house itself. The soft creaks of cooling wood. The tick-tick-tick of the long case clock downstairs. The wind sighing against the panes. Victorians didn't have sound machines, but they had their own versions. A dripping faucet, a gently purring cat, the faint crackle of the last coals settling in the hearth. And then, the final task before bed, the inspection of locks. Not just one, all of them. You pad softly through the house, candle in hand, checking latches and bolts. Not because you're worried about burglars, but because the act itself is symbolic. You're locking the world away, sealing it outside, making a boundary between out there and in here, where sleep, hopefully, waits. Some families went further. One Scottish household had a formal closing of the day prayer circle that involved sitting in silence for 5 full minutes before uttering a single whispered phrase, "The Lord still watches while we sleep." No one knows who started it, or why, but they kept it up for 30 years. You settle back into your bed. The linen's been aired. The curtains drawn. The coals banked just enough to smolder until dawn. You listen to the house breathe, those tiny shifting sounds of walls, fabric, time. And you feel it, slowly, impossibly, arriving. The gentle hush, the almost sleep, the blanketing. Was it the milk, the spoon, the hairbrush, or just the accumulation of careful, loving steps? It doesn't matter. Sleep isn't a destination. It's a direction. And tonight, finally, you're headed there. You're floating into a quieter part of Victorian life now, the world of the bedroom itself. Not just the bedtime rituals, but the very furniture and surroundings that shaped how people tried to sleep back then. Beds, linens, pillows, things you probably take for granted, were all objects of intense attention, debate, and sometimes downright obsession. Picture the Victorian bedroom, a dark, heavy room with thick wallpaper patterned in deep florals or damask. The bed dominates the space, a fortress of wood or iron, often draped with heavy curtains. These curtains weren't just for show, they were designed to keep drafts at bay, because central heating was a pipe dream for most. The chill of an unheated stone house would sneak in like a ghost, so enclosing yourself in layers was part comfort, part survival. The mattresses? Stuffed with feathers, horsehair, or even straw, depending on your social standing. The wealthy might luxuriate on multiple feather mattresses piled atop one another, while working-class Victorians often had to settle for something less fluffy and far less restful. It's said that even some nobles tossed and turned all night, battling the occasional bedbug or lumpy straw. Historians still argue whether the notoriously stiff Victorian mattresses actually helped with sleep or made it worse, especially considering the rigid expectations about posture and proper sleep positions. Some doctors insisted you should sleep upright slightly to aid digestion and avoid night sweats. That probably explains a lot about the number of pillows, bolsters, and cushions jammed under a single sleeper's head. Speaking of pillows, the Victorians were surprisingly inventive. Beyond the standard feather pillow, they used all sorts of homemade variations: lavender-filled cushions, buckwheat hulls, and even small bags of horsehair designed to support the neck. Some of these had strange side effects, like the infamous horsehair allergy, which might cause sneezing fits right when you're trying to drift off. You carefully run your fingers over the bed linens. Fine cotton or linen, often starched and ironed with the precision of a royal ceremony. Cleanliness was next to godliness, especially in the bedroom. Sheets were changed frequently, a luxury not always possible, but highly prized. Some Victorians kept a special sleeping sheet, just for bedtimes, treated with mild fragrances to soothe nerves. Here's a quirky Victorian tidbit. Mattress lice were a real problem, and while the word lice makes you cringe, the Victorians had an oddly casual attitude about them. They believed these tiny creatures were part of the natural ecosystem of a bed, and often used special powders or fumigations to keep them in check. One popular remedy: ground tobacco sprinkled under the sheets. Sweet dreams, indeed. Furniture in the bedroom extended beyond the bed. There were washstands with porcelain basins and pitchers, for nightly face-washing rituals, essential for freshening up before sleep. Chairs with embroidered cushions stood by the bedside for reading or removing the day's corsets and cravats. And, of course, a small writing desk might hold a night diary or a book of poetry. Some homes even featured a night commode, a wooden chair with a concealed chamber pot beneath. Practical, but not exactly romantic. Yet it's a reminder of how far modern conveniences have come. You try not to think too hard about nighttime bathroom trips on cold, creaky floorboards. And the room's lighting, usually a single candle or a small oil lamp, flickered gently, casting shadows that danced across the walls. The play of light and dark was part of the atmosphere, creating a sense of calm mystery that could lull even the most restless mind. Historians still debate how much the bedroom environment contributed to insomnia versus other factors like diet, stress, or social pressures. Was the heavy decor comforting or suffocating? Did the scented linens help or overwhelm? You sense the answer is a little bit of everything. By the end of the day, you find yourself sinking into the mattress, wrapped in layers of blankets and dreams, surrounded by these carefully crafted comforts. You're not just lying down to sleep, you're stepping into a Victorian sleep sanctuary, a cocoon built from necessity, ritual, and a touch of hopeful magic. So, here you are, warm, supported, and breathing in the faint scent of lavender and beeswax. Your bed is a promise of rest, even if sleep remains a shy visitor. You close your eyes and listen to the house settle, feeling that familiar tug of drowsiness start to take hold. You're settling deeper into the Victorian night now, and it's time to peek into the curious world of Victorian insomnia remedies, the ones that didn't involve machines or linens, but medicine, tonics, tinctures, and a parade of mysterious elixirs designed to coax your eyelids down and keep your brain from running wild. The apothecary shops were the pharmacies of their day, filled with rows of glass jars and bottles bearing labels in looping cursive: sleep draft, nerve calmer, sedative elixir. You step inside, the scent of herbs, alcohol, and sometimes something more chemical filling the air. The apothecary knows you're desperate. You want relief but have no idea which potion will work. Morphine, opium, and laudanum, these were the big guns. Prescribed widely, sometimes recklessly, for any number of complaints, including sleeplessness. You might find it shocking, but Victorians used these narcotics not only for pain but as a gentle aid for restless nights. It was a double-edged sword, effective but dangerously addictive. Yet, the use of opium tinctures for sleep remains a topic historians still argue about. Was it mostly compassionate medicine, or a convenient way to silence the poor and powerless? Probably a bit of both, but the truth is buried in layers of social history and personal tragedy. On the lighter side, you'd also find remedies like valerian root, a herb with a famously pungent smell that earned it the nickname stinkweed. People took it in capsules, teas, or tinctures, hoping its sedative qualities would calm their minds. Some swear by it even today, while others describe it as sleeping with a swamp. There were also more unusual concoctions. One famous nightcap recipe combined hot milk, a teaspoon of brandy, and a sprinkle of nutmeg. Nutmeg, as you might suspect, can have hallucinogenic effects in high doses, so if your nightcap turned into a surreal adventure, you weren't alone. Victorian sleep researchers still debate whether such blends were deliberate mood enhancers or just lucky accidents. You sip a cup of warm milk, remembering the soft clink of china cups and the hiss of steam from the kettle. Milk was a classic folk remedy for sleep, thought to soothe the nerves and provide a feeling of comfort. The Victorians loved comfort. They clung to it like a life raft during their often stressful days. Another popular remedy was bromide salts, discovered in the 1850s and soon hailed as a miracle sedative. Bromides acted on the nervous system, dulling anxiety and encouraging sleep. But as you might guess, overuse led to bromism, a toxic condition causing confusion and skin rashes. Not the best way to rest peacefully. Still, bromides were widely prescribed, even to children, for decades. The debate among historians centers on whether the damage caused by these drugs was recognized early or ignored in favor of economic and social convenience. A lesser-known Victorian sleep aid was the quiet room, a space designed with silence in mind, often in the home or a hospital. It was lined with soft materials to absorb sound, sometimes equipped with white noise machines powered by clockworks that mimicked the gentle patter of rain or the rustle of leaves. You might imagine yourself wrapped in muffled calm, cocooned from every external distraction. And if all else failed, the Victorians turned to more natural therapies. Bathwater soaks infused with lavender or rose petals, warm foot baths, and gentle massage. Aromatherapy, though not called that yet, was already a beloved practice. The scent of rosemary, thyme, or chamomile filled the night air, believed to draw out anxiety and invite sweet dreams. One curious remedy was the sleep pillow, a small sachet filled with herbs and sometimes powdered camphor or dried rose hips, placed under the head to encourage restful slumber. Some believed it worked by exhaling calming vapors. Others said it was more psychological, a comfort object to anchor the mind. You imagine yourself drifting into sleep, aided by these gentle helpers. The warmth of the milk, the scent of the pillow, the distant ticking of a clock. Despite the quirks and dangers of some remedies, there's a tenderness in their intention, a shared human hope that even the most restless night might yield rest. And so, your eyelids grow heavy. The world softens around the edges. Sleep isn't a scientific certainty, but a fragile, fleeting guest. And tonight, with a little Victorian magic and medicine on your side, it might just stay a while. The night deepens, and now you're wandering into a less discussed, yet fascinating Victorian obsession, the science, and sometimes pseudoscience, of sleep hygiene. Today, you might call it sleep wellness. But back then it was an odd mix of earnest advice, superstition, and downright peculiar rules. Imagine Victorian newspapers and magazines filled with columns dedicated to the proper way to sleep. Articles advised on everything from room temperature to pillow fluffiness, and even the exact number of hours one should aim for, which, spoiler alert, was often debated by experts of the day. One common recommendation was to sleep in a cool room, but not too cool. Around 60 to 65 degrees Fahrenheit was ideal. Too cold, and you'd risk catching a chill. Too warm, and the night's rest would be disturbed by sweating and discomfort. Central heating was rare, so managing this balance was a nightly struggle. Victorians favored heavy bedding for warmth, but too many layers could stifle circulation and disrupt sleep cycles. The balance of warmth and airflow was a nightly puzzle. Remember the warming pans from earlier? They were part of this delicate dance between comfort and chill. There were even manuals on how to breathe properly while sleeping. A reminder that Victorian life loved systematizing even the smallest details. Deep, slow breaths were said to calm the nerves and slow the heart, easing you gently into sleep. Some recommended inhaling through the nose and exhaling through the mouth. You might try it now, slow, steady breaths, just to feel that calm creeping in. Historians still argue about how effective these sleep hygiene tips were in practice, especially given the often cramped living conditions in Victorian cities. Imagine a family of 6 sharing a small, poorly ventilated bedroom. How do you keep the air fresh and cool then? And then there's the curious Victorian habit of sleepwalking prevention. People believed that eating spicy food or drinking caffeine after midday could cause night wandering or even somnambulism, a topic that sparked lively medical debates. To counter this, nighttime meals were bland and light. Porridge, bread, and sometimes jelly, nothing too stimulating. In wealthier households, you might find elaborate ventilation systems, early air conditioning, if you will. Some homes had windows that opened into air shafts, or mechanical fans powered by weights and pulleys. This was cutting-edge technology, but historians still debate how widespread and effective these systems really were. Sleep clothing, too, was a topic of interest. Wearing heavy nightgowns or multiple layers was common, but it could restrict movement. Some doctors recommended lighter, breathable fabrics for better rest. Nightcaps were popular, not just to keep warmth in, but to prevent headaches and night chills. You're probably chuckling now, imagining some of these Victorian sleep advice columns as the distant ancestors of modern wellness influencers. But the earnestness is there. Victorians wanted good sleep, just like we do, and they tried their best with the knowledge they had. And then, for something completely different, the Victorian fascination with sleep experiments. Not the creepy kind you might imagine, but controlled observations on how different conditions affected sleep. One eccentric gentleman even slept in a glass box in his garden for a year, recording everything from temperature changes to bird calls and their effect on his dreams. Oddly, some of these early sleep studies contributed to our understanding of circadian rhythms and light exposure. But historians still debate whether the methods were rigorous or just eccentric hobbies of the scientifically curious. The night stretches on. Your breath slows. The air feels cooler but comfortable. Somewhere in the distance, a clock chimes softly. You find yourself lulled not just by the promise of sleep, but by the earnest human quest for rest, a quest that has been with us for centuries. And here you are, in your own quiet moment, part of that timeless search. The bed feels softer, the night calmer. You might just drift off now, guided by the wisdom and whimsy of Victorian nights past. The hours are turning, and now you slip into a quieter corner of Victorian life. The role of nighttime rituals and the curious superstitions that whispered around the edges of sleep. These weren't just quaint habits. They were deeply woven into the fabric of daily life, a mix of folk wisdom and gentle magic aimed at easing the soul and chasing away bad dreams. You imagine yourself in a dimly lit Victorian bedroom, the flicker of candlelight casting long shadows on wallpaper patterned with roses or ivy. Before settling into bed, many Victorians performed a series of small, calming rituals, each with its own meaning and purpose. One beloved tradition was the bedtime prayer, a few whispered lines asking for protection and peaceful sleep. This was common across social classes and regions, a nightly pause for reflection and comfort. The act of praying wasn't just religious. It was a way to slow down the mind and prepare for rest. But beyond prayers, there were also fascinating folk customs that seem a bit odd to modern ears. For instance, placing a silver coin under your pillow was thought to ward off nightmares and attract good dreams. You might chuckle at the idea, but imagine the tiny jingling coin pressing softly against your head all night. Then there were dream catchers of a sort, homemade charms made from threads, ribbons, or bits of lace, hung near the bed or window. These were believed to catch bad dreams like cobwebs while letting the good ones slip through. Historians still argue whether such objects were more spiritual talismans or just comforting distractions. Another curious practice involved the timing of bedtime. Many believed that going to bed exactly at the witching hour, around midnight, could invite restless spirits or unsettling dreams. So households often aimed to be asleep well before then, adding a touch of urgency to their evening routines. You might find it amusing that some Victorian guides recommended leaving the bedroom door slightly ajar to let good spirits enter and bad ones escape. A bit like a supernatural air freshener. The debate among scholars remains whether these beliefs influenced architecture or were just hopeful superstitions. You pull the blanket a little tighter and consider the role of pets in these rituals. Cats and dogs were often thought to have protective powers at night, and it was common to let a cat curl up near the bed to chase away evil spirits. Their gentle purring was more than companionship, it was a soothing lullaby. On the food front, some Victorians kept a small dish of salt by the bedside, believing it could absorb bad energy or evil eye attacks during sleep. Salt's purifying qualities were part science, part superstition, and entirely Victorian. Sleepwalking, too, had its own set of rituals. Families might place knives or scissors under the pillow to cut the sleepwalker's connection to wandering, a practice still debated among historians as either superstition or an early attempt at behavioral control. One particularly quirky Victorian belief held that the position you slept in could invite certain dreams or spirits. Sleeping face up might attract wisdom, while sleeping face down was thought to invite bad luck. So, some people went to bed with the precision of a chess player, positioning themselves just right. You listen closely and hear the gentle creak of the house settling, the soft scratch of a quill writing a last note by candlelight, the distant footsteps of a night nurse on patrol. These are the sounds of a world that was both familiar and mysterious, a world where the boundary between science and superstition was softly blurred. The night draws you in, wrapping you in these whispered traditions and quiet hopes. You feel a connection to those who sought comfort and calm in their own way, across a century and a world away. And as your eyes grow heavier, you drift gently on the edge of sleep, carried by the weight of centuries-old rituals and the promise of sweet dreams. The night deepens further, and now you drift into the fascinating realm of Victorian bedroom design and how the very space you sleep in was thought to shape your rest. This isn't just about furniture, it's about atmosphere, light, and the subtle science of comfort that Victorians took quite seriously. Imagine yourself stepping into a typical Victorian bedroom. Heavy drapes of velvet or brocade hang from tall windows, thick carpets cover polished wooden floors, and the bed itself is a stately affair, often a four-poster draped with curtains meant to keep out drafts and prying eyes. These curtains weren't just decorative, they helped trap heat and create a cozy private sanctuary. Victorian designers believed that a restful bedroom was key to a good night's sleep, so they paid close attention to color schemes and materials. Soft, muted colors like pale greens, blues, and creams were favored because they were thought to soothe the mind. Bright or gaudy patterns were usually reserved for more public spaces. Historians still debate whether the obsession with cleanliness, sparked by new ideas about germs, helped or hindered sleep. On one hand, fresh air was encouraged, and bedrooms were aired out daily. On the other, the heavy furnishings and layered fabrics trapped dust and allergens, which could actually cause discomfort or restless nights. You might be surprised to learn that many Victorian bedrooms had no electric lights, of course, so they relied heavily on candlelight or gas lamps. The flickering light created a warm, shifting ambience that was both comforting and a bit mysterious. But too much light could disrupt sleep cycles, a fact doctors began to notice and discuss. The bed itself was a marvel of Victorian innovation. Mattresses were often stuffed with horsehair or feathers, materials that were comfortable but also prone to harboring mites and dust. Feather beds, while luxurious, sometimes caused allergies that historians argue might have contributed to insomnia in some cases. To combat chill, many beds had warming pans or hot water bottles, tools that had to be prepared carefully to avoid burns or leaks. The warmth was a gentle invitation to sleep, a little luxury on cold nights. On the quirky side, some Victorian bedrooms featured sleep bells, small bells attached to the bedposts or nearby furniture that could be rung quietly to summon a servant if the sleeper needed assistance during the night. The idea of being on call, even while asleep, might seem stressful now, but for many it was reassuring. And if you think that's odd, consider that some bedrooms were equipped with built-in ventilation shafts, designed to circulate fresh air without letting in drafts. These architectural features were often disguised behind ornate woodwork or plaster, blending utility with style. Sleep researchers today still argue about how effective these ventilation systems were, given the poor urban air quality in many Victorian cities. You can imagine the struggle between fresh air and smoke-filled streets, a tension that made deep, restful sleep a challenge for many. The furniture in these rooms was also carefully chosen for its calming effect. Nightstands often held small bowls of water for moistening lips or a glass of warm milk, while dressing tables were stocked with herbs and lotions meant to relax the body before bed. You might even find a small music box tucked away, playing soft melodies to lull the household to sleep. The Victorians loved the idea of sound therapy, believing gentle music could quiet a restless mind, though some scholars debate how widespread this practice really was. As you settle under the heavy quilt, feeling the textures of velvet and linen against your skin, you realize how much care was devoted to crafting a perfect sleep environment. It wasn't just about the hours in bed, it was about the entire sensory experience leading up to sleep. And so, in this room filled with history, you feel the weight of tradition and innovation cradling you, ready to carry you through the night's peaceful journey. As your thoughts begin to slow, you wander into the world of Victorian sleep habits among different social classes, a fascinating glimpse at how wealth, work, and daily routine shaped the experience of night. For the upper class, nights were often long, with elaborate evening rituals designed to transition smoothly from bustling days to peaceful rest. After a late dinner and some light reading or conversation, you'd find yourself in a spacious, softly lit bedroom, perhaps accompanied by a chambermaid or nurse. These attendants might prepare your bed with warm flannels or apply soothing balms, luxuries that added layers of comfort. By contrast, working-class Victorians faced a harsher reality. Crowded living conditions meant sharing small, sometimes single rooms with entire families or boarders. Privacy was a rare luxury, and the noise and smells of the city often crept in through thin walls and open windows. You might find yourself lying awake on a lumpy mattress, the sounds of carts and footsteps outside competing with your racing thoughts. Historians still argue how much these environmental factors contributed to widespread Victorian insomnia. Was it just the stress of industrialization and urban life, or also the actual physical conditions of the bedrooms? The answer is probably both. In rural areas, the rhythms of sleep were tied closely to natural light and agricultural demands. You imagine yourself waking at dawn to the crowing of roosters, going to bed soon after dusk, and living in a world governed by sun and season rather than clocks. The simplicity of rural nights didn't guarantee better sleep, but it shaped a different kind of restfulness. Curiously, in some parts of Victorian England, the middle classes adopted a sort of split sleep pattern. Two distinct periods of rest with a waking interval in between. During this wakeful hour, people might read, write letters, or even visit neighbors. Sleep researchers today debate whether this was a natural sleep cycle or a response to the stresses of Victorian life. You also learn about the Victorian obsession with bedtime stories, especially for children. Fairy tales and moral stories were read aloud to encourage calm and virtue. The tone was often gentle but serious, emphasizing good behavior and peaceful dreams. Meanwhile, now, as you sink deeper into relaxation, let's explore one of the more unusual Victorian remedies for insomnia: the curious world of medicinal concoctions and sleep aids. These ranged from comforting potions to strange mixtures that might raise an eyebrow today. The Victorians loved their tonics. You could find everything from simple herbal teas to complex elixirs advertised as guaranteed cures for sleeplessness. Valerian root, chamomile, and hops were popular ingredients, believed to soothe the nerves and gently ease you towards sleep. You might already know chamomile tea as a modern classic, but its use dates back centuries. Yet, Victorian medicine was a mix of sound herbal practice and some frankly peculiar inventions. One remedy involved opium drops, tiny doses meant to quiet restlessness without causing full narcotic effects. Though effective, these could lead to dependence, a fact often downplayed in advertisements and medical advice. Historians still debate how widely these opium-based remedies were used by ordinary people versus the wealthy, who had more access to patent medicines and medical professionals. What's clear is that Victorian insomnia sufferers were eager for relief, and the market responded accordingly. Another common cure was warm milk with a pinch of baking soda or even a dash of beer, which was thought to relax muscles and settle the stomach. You can almost taste the comforting warmth as you imagine a nurse quietly delivering this bedside drink. Then there were less savory treatments. Some Victorian doctors prescribed bromides, a chemical sedative that promised restful sleep but could cause serious side effects. Bromide use became so widespread that it was nicknamed the sleeping pill of the 19th century, yet its safety was questioned even then. In addition to medicines, you might be surprised to learn about the popularity of hypnotism and mesmerism during this era. Victorian showmen and some physicians claimed they could induce sleep or cure insomnia by manipulating the mind's focus. The debate about whether hypnotism was legitimate therapy or theatrical nonsense continues among scholars. You can picture a dimly lit parlor, where a hypnotist's voice gently soothes a restless audience, promising dreams of peaceful slumber. Some people swore by these sessions, while others regarded them as mere spectacle. And of course, there was the ever-present cup of tea, decaffeinated varieties, of course. The ritual of brewing and sipping was itself a comfort, a pause that calmed the mind before bedtime. The Victorians also believed in bedtime baths, to relax the body and wash away the worries of the day. Warm baths infused with lavender or rosemary were common, helping to lower body temperature afterward, a key factor in falling asleep. Historians still argue how effective these remedies truly were, but the sheer variety reflects a culture desperate for solutions to sleepless nights. You can almost feel the hope mixed with frustration in every prescription and tonic. And as you drift closer to sleep, perhaps you'll carry with you a faint scent of lavender or a memory of that warm milk, tiny Victorian comforts echoing through time. The night deepens as you gently float towards sleep, and now you find yourself in the quieter, often overlooked realm of Victorian dreams and their interpretations, a world where science, superstition, and psychology danced a delicate waltz. Victorians were fascinated by dreams. Many kept detailed journals to record nightly visions, hoping to decode their meaning or predict future events. Dream dictionaries, some serious, some delightfully whimsical, were popular bedside companions, offering interpretations from seeing water as a sign of emotional turmoil to losing teeth as a symbol of anxiety. You might picture a well-dressed Victorian carefully jotting down a dream under the soft glow of a candle, pen scratching quietly on paper while outside, gas lamps flicker and horse-drawn carriages clatter by. But dreams weren't merely personal curiosities. They had cultural significance, often seen as messages from the subconscious or even spiritual communications. Some believed nightmares were caused by restless spirits or night hags pressing down on the sleeper, an idea echoing ancient folklore. Historians still argue about how much Victorian dream interpretation was shaped by emerging psychology versus older folk beliefs. The line was blurry, but the fascination was clear. You might smile at the quirky fact that some Victorians used dream pillows filled with herbs like lavender and mugwort, thought to encourage pleasant dreams or prophetic visions. These tiny sachets were tucked beneath heads or slipped inside pillowcases, a kind of botanical hope for restful nights. Dream analysis also intersected with the burgeoning field of psychoanalysis. Though Freud's ideas were still spreading, early Victorian thinkers debated whether dreams revealed hidden desires or simply random brain activity. The scholarly argument over the purpose and meaning of dreams continues even now. Some doctors recommended controlled dreaming techniques, like focusing on positive images before sleep, as a remedy for insomnia and anxiety. These ideas laid early groundwork for modern cognitive behavioral therapy for sleep. Meanwhile, Victorian fiction often portrayed dreams as gateways to other worlds or secret knowledge. You can imagine the eerie thrill of reading a ghost story by lamplight, wondering if your own dreams might carry hidden messages. Oddly, many Victorians believed that sleeping with the head pointing north could influence dream content, a belief linked to ancient geomantic traditions. Whether or not this had any real effect, it added another layer of nighttime ritual. As your eyelids grow heavier, you feel the lingering sense of mystery that surrounded sleep for Victorians, a blend of curiosity, caution, and a touch of wonder. In this twilight space between waking and dreaming, you carry forward a piece of that same curiosity, ready to let the night take you wherever it will. As you drift closer to sleep, you enter the world of Victorian nightwear and bedtime rituals, where fabric, fashion, and habit combine to prepare the body and mind for rest. Victorian night clothes were far from the simple pajamas we know today. Instead, you'd likely find yourself wrapped in a long, flowing nightgown made of cotton or flannel, often embroidered or trimmed with lace. Comfortable, but also a statement of modesty and status. Women's nightgowns sometimes featured high collars and long sleeves, while men might wear shirts paired with loose trousers. Interestingly, there was an entire etiquette around nightwear. Changing into night clothes marked the transition from public to private life and signaled the body to unwind. This ritual was as much psychological as practical, a gentle signal to your brain that the day was done. Historians still argue about how much Victorian nightwear actually influenced sleep quality. While the fabrics were breathable, heavy layers and multiple undergarments could sometimes cause overheating, which modern science shows is not ideal for falling asleep. On chillier nights, woolen shawls, dressing gowns, or even capes were added. You can almost feel the softness of flannel against your skin, the comforting weight of a blanket or quilt tucked around your shoulders. Another curious Victorian habit was the wearing of special night caps. Not the party kind, but soft, snug caps designed to keep warmth in. While these might seem quaint or even silly today, they were practical in poorly heated homes and thought to prevent headaches and chills. Beyond clothing, bedtime rituals often included a series of small but meaningful actions. Many Victorians wrote letters or read poetry before bed, calming the mind with gentle literature rather than the jarring flicker of modern screens. You might picture a cozy fireside scene, a person in soft nightclothes, holding a favorite book, the fire casting dancing shadows on the wall. This quiet time was valued as a way to ease into rest. Historians debate whether these calming rituals had measurable effects on sleep or were simply comforting habits. Either way, they helped establish a soothing bedtime routine, something that sleep experts still recommend today. A slightly odd but endearing detail is the use of bedtime prayers or meditation, which many Victorians practiced to quiet the mind. Religious or secular, these moments of reflection were believed to promote peace and prepare the soul for the night. And then there was the practice of midnight snacks. Small bites like toast or warm milk, meant to prevent hunger from disturbing sleep. You can almost smell the yeast and butter, a tiny luxury in the quiet dark. As you imagine slipping into these garments and rituals, you realize how thoughtfully Victorians crafted their nightly farewell to the day. The care was less about fashion and more about nurturing a gentle descent into sleep. The soft fabric, the flickering firelight, the faint scent of lavender or rose water, all combine to wrap you in a cocoon of comfort and calm, ready to carry you into deeper rest. As your breathing slows and the night grows quieter, you find yourself stepping into the curious world of Victorian sleep superstitions and nighttime customs. Those little rituals and beliefs that offered comfort or a sense of control when the darkness felt uncertain. Victorians, like many cultures before and since, were deeply superstitious about the night. For example, it was common to place a small bowl of salt by the bedside, believed to ward off evil spirits or bad dreams. Salt, a symbol of purity and protection, was thought to absorb negative energy during the vulnerable hours of sleep. You might imagine the soft sound of sprinkling salt, or a quiet hand placing the bowl just so before slipping under the covers. These small acts could provide a subtle sense of security, a psychological balm for anxious sleepers. Another widespread belief was that you should never sleep with your head pointing west. Some thought this orientation invited restless spirits or disturbed dreams. This idea linked back to ancient notions about directions and the soul's journey after death. Historians still debate how much these superstitions were genuinely feared versus performed as quaint traditions. But their persistence shows how sleep was surrounded by layers of meaning, both practical and mystical. You might be surprised to learn that some Victorians believed that whistling indoors at night could summon ghosts or invite bad luck, a curious mix of caution and folklore that shaped behavior in homes and hospitals alike. And then there was the witching hour, typically midnight to 1 a.m., a time when the veil between worlds was thought to thin. Many avoided getting up or moving around during these minutes, fearing misfortune. In rural areas, people might leave doors slightly open to allow spirits safe passage, preventing hauntings. Quirky nighttime customs also included carrying small charms or talismans in your nightclothes, such as a sprig of rosemary or a tiny silver coin, meant to protect against nightmares or evil influences. Victorian nurses and doctors often encountered these beliefs in their patients, and some incorporated rituals into their care, blending medicine with cultural sensitivity, a practice historians still discuss regarding the social history of medicine. These superstitions reveal how the Victorians coped with the mystery of sleep, a state still poorly understood then and even now. You might imagine a quiet house at night, shadows deepening, and the soft murmur of prayers or whispered charms easing fear and encouraging rest. As your own eyelids flutter, you carry with you a touch of this gentle magic, a reminder that sometimes comfort is found in ritual as much as science. The night embraces you softly, a world of stories, hopes, and quiet protection surrounding your dreams. And now, we arrive at the end of the Victorian night, the final moments before the household falls completely silent, and the world settles into sleep. You're there too, surrounded by flickering shadows, the hush of distant gas lamps, and the soft rustle of your nightgown against the sheets. The entire home followed its own choreography before sleep. In wealthier Victorian households, servants would quietly dim the lamps, stoke the fire for the last time, and perhaps place a hot water bottle under the blankets. Footsteps would echo lightly through long hallways, and the clink of a teacup might be the last sound before silence. In more modest homes, bedtime was simpler but no less ritualistic. Doors were locked, shutters drawn tight against the night, and perhaps a Bible or well-loved novel rested by the bedside. You'd hear the creak of bed springs, maybe a child murmuring half-dreams in the next room, and then stillness. But even in sleep, the Victorians were not free from concern. Many believed in night air, a dangerous miasmic fog that could bring illness if windows were left open. As a result, bedrooms were often stuffy, though the brave few advocated for what they called air bathing, opening windows to let the cold in and the bad humors out. Historians still argue whether this fear of night air delayed public health advances or simply reflected the best understanding of disease at the time. Either way, the tension between comfort and health shaped every bedroom in the era. By the late 19th century, electric lighting and central heating were beginning to change sleep habits. The soft orange glow of oil lamps gave way to harsher bulbs, and suddenly, night didn't feel quite as sacred or defined. The hours stretched longer, the dark less absolute. Still, most people clung to their evening routines. The books, the baths, the whispered superstitions, like soft shields against the unknown. And through all of it, sleep remained mysterious, elusive, and deeply sought after. One last quirky detail. Some Victorians slept sitting up, propped with pillows and sometimes even strapped into position. They believed reclining too far could lead to poor digestion or drowning in one's own humors. You can just imagine the awkwardness of a midnight read in that setup. These final nighttime practices, no matter how strange they seem now, tell us something quietly beautiful. The great lengths to which people will go to rest, to soothe the mind, and to feel safe enough to let go of consciousness. And now, with your own breathing slow and even, you lie back in your imagined four-poster bed, warm beneath layers of blankets, the flicker of the last candle fading into darkness. The world outside continues, but here, within the quiet chamber of this story, you are safe, still, and just on the edge of dreaming. And so, with the last of the lamps dimmed and the hush of the Victorian night settling in, we pause. The streets beyond the curtains are quiet now. No carriages, no footmen, just a gentle breeze nudging at the window panes. Your room is still. The layers of time that wrapped around you, lace cuffs, lavender-scented pillows, candlelit baths, have all softened into the background, leaving only warmth and quiet and rest. In this moment, there's nothing left to solve, no remedy to brew, no slippers to fetch. The effort of the day, real or imagined, melts away like the final ember in the fireplace. Your limbs grow heavier. Your thoughts stretch out, slower now, like long shadows at dusk. The Victorians never fully understood sleep, but perhaps that's the point. Perhaps it was never something to conquer, just something to enter, gently, like water or mist. And here you are, drifting, not needing to know where the river leads. There's comfort in that unknowing, in surrender, in softness. So if your eyes are still open, let them flutter closed. Let your breath deepen, unhurried and quiet. Let the stillness wrap around you like a velvet shawl. You've wandered through drawing rooms and apothecaries, tiptoed past old remedies and whispered prayers, and now, it's time to rest. No more stories tonight, just the sound of your breath, the hush of the dark, the slow, steady welcome of sleep. Sweet dreams.